Hello class, welcome to slides and video for lecture 9.1. This is on consumer choice and demand, and we're going to be focused mostly on examining this from the point of income, and in the next class we'll do more focus on changes in price. But yeah, this is a really important section, so hopefully you've done the reading so far, pages 97 to 111. So far we have calculated an optimal bundle, but we want to know like what happens to the optimal bundle when parameters change, like your income or the prices, and then how can the information from this change be interpreted? And kind of the hint is it's kind of the demand curve. So this approach is used by firms when setting prices and government when setting policies. Some examples would be like, how much can the price of an iPhone be profitably raised above costs? A lot of economists make a lot of money from this. By randomly testing what small changes in price do to quantity demanded using these A/B tests. And another like more policy-oriented question is like if we were to increase gasoline taxes, how much of a subsidy would be required to keep poor individuals at least as well off before the gasoline tax increase? And so we're going to get at questions like that using these techniques that I'm about to show you. So so far. When we've done the Lagrangian and the substitution method in the prior lectures, we've been solving for Q1 and Q2 as a function of prices of good 1 and good 2 and income. And so we can get these optimal Q1s and Q2s as a function of these prices and incomes, which is what is shown in this 1 and 2 numbers here. And what we do is we solve for optimal quantities, and we notice that if you look at Q1 star, there's no Q2 in the function that we solve for. And if you look at Q2 star, there's no Q1 in the function that we solve for. And that's because when we want to get this demand function for these goods, then we need to solve the quantity of them, or the optimal quantity, without having the other goods Q in it. So when the choice variables Q1 and Q2 are a function of no other choice variable, is when you can stop rearranging for Q1 and Q2. And so, yeah, this is just emphasizing that there is no Q2 in here and there is no Q1 in here. And that's when you've finished. So there's a lot of different indifference curves and demand functions conditional on what the utility function looks like. And I just wanted to show you where the indifference curves that we've been using most often come from. They come from these Cobb-Douglas utility functions, which is Q1A times Q2 1 minus A. If you go through and you solve for it without plugging in numbers for prices and income, you can get these optimal quantities are AY over P1 and 1 minus AY over P2. And you can look in this Q1 function and see that there's no P2 in there. So Q1, the optimal amount of quantity 1 doesn't depend at all on the price of good 2, and vice versa for good 2. So you see these are Cobb-Douglas indifference curves, and these goods are neither complements or substitutes. And so I want to show you kind of like the most like important result that we'll see these slides. So a consumer's original optimal bundle is this point O for P1, P2, and Y. So you can see all these things are on the graph here, and we're going to do pizza and hoodies. And so we want to know when the budget constraint rotates out so we can afford more bundles of goods, what happens to our optimal decision and how can we interpret that? So we've rotated this out because the price of good 1 has gone from P1 to P1 prime, rotating the budget constraint out. And so if we spend all our money on good 1, because the price is lower, we can buy more of good 1. And that's why this hasn't changed, but this has. And so let's say our new optimal amount is O prime right here. And we can now we're now buying more of good 1 and more of good 2. And with the price decrease, we're becoming wealthier, essentially. And with that wealth, we can buy more of both goods. And something we'll cover next class is another factor at play here is that the slope of the budget constraint has changed. And that means that the relative prices of good 1 and good 2 are different now. And so we substitute between them differently, giving rise to a substitution effect. which will be the subject of next class. And so from this price change in good one, and now that we know where our new optimal bundle is, we can start to use those to understand the demand curve for good one. And so our top bundle has showed how the optimal value of Q1 star changes when P1 changes, holding income Y stays the same, no Y prime here, and P2 stays the same, no Y, no P2 prime. And so we have Q1 star for P1 and P1 prime, which are two different points, right? Q1 star is going to be different for P1 and under P1 prime, because this Q1 is greater under P1 prime than Q1 under P1 not prime. And so here's P1 Q1 and price, quantity, space for a hoodie, and that corresponds to this point right here. And then now we have P1 prime Q1 prime, which is here, it corresponds to O prime. And now we have 2 points in the demand curve space. So in the P1 Q1 space, which we've covered already, is where we've been graphing our demand curve, quantity 1 as a function of price 1. And so we have different observed price 1 and corresponding Q1s. And so we have enough, if we assume linearity here, to have a demand curve between P1 and P1 prime. And let's say that we have another price increase, so P1 prime increases to P1 prime double prime. And there's now a new Q1 at O double prime. So now we're buying even more Q1. And so what we have is we have another point on the demand curve, and we can just fit a curve to that. And you'll notice that this is just the individual's demand curve. So we have derived the demand curve from utility maximizing decisions, holding other determinants of demand constant, prices and prices of related goods and income. And so, yeah, we have derived demand curve. Here it is for you. And so now we have this price consumption curve that goes through the optimal bundles here, which just shows you how consumption changes as the price changes in a Q1, Q2 plane. So that's like the main result of this. And now we're going to kind of use slight variations on it to make other interpretations. And so we have this consumer's optimal bundle O for prices P1, P2, and income like last time. Well, now income is going to change and become and when the income changes from Y to Y prime, it affects the amount of Q1 and Q2 we can purchase. It increases both of them. And while it does that, it doesn't change the slope of the line because the relative prices are the same. That means the price of good one compared to the price of good two is still the same. The same slope of the line, the same marginal rate of transformation. And so it shifts out in this parallel fashion to BC prime. And then we have our new O prime here. And what happens is, here's our first point here that corresponds to O and Y, the original income. And then when our income increases to Y prime and our budget constraint shifts out, we can plot out how this shifts the demand curve outwards. Recall from demand that when income goes up, demand shifts out. And so that's what we got going on right here, because our income has shifted out, our demand has shifted out for this good. And so this is how much. It's from P1 Q1 Y to P1 Q1 Y prime. So we can do this again, and we have O prime prime for our income shifting out twice to Y prime prime, double prime. We can see that it expands, or it shifts out the demand curve again to being at the same price, the same P1, but with a larger income, the demand is shifted out, which we expected. And what we're going to do is we're going to call this the income consumption curve, is just the lines through our optimal bundles. And we can plot this income consumption curve in income quantity one space. And this is called the Engel curve. It documents how consumption changes with changes in income. Should be pretty straightforward. And so Now we got to bring back income elasticity. So far, we've kind of implicitly assumed that goods are normal globally. However, this might not always be the case. Recall, we've got our income elasticity as the percent change in quantity demanded over percent change in income. If this elasticity is less than 0, then an increase in income makes you buy less of that good, and we'd call that good inferior, meaning that as income goes up, you buy less. And so let's say that we have our original bundle, optimal bundle O, and our income increases to Y prime, so that shifts our budget constraint out to be C prime. Now I'm going to draw in these lines to kind of compare what happens to the optimal bundle. So first thing that could happen is we could have O prime being in between kind of these two lines here. And what this means is that both goods are normal because comparing O prime to O, we've bought more of good 1 and we've bought more of good 2. And so as our income is increased, both our quantity demanded of both goods is increased, indicating that both goods are normal. And so what happens when our optimal bundle is over here at this O prime? Well, we've bought more of good 2, and that's why this point is vertically higher than this point, but we've bought less of good 1. So this optimal bundle is to the left of the original O. And so that just means that good 1 is inferior. Our income is increased and we've reduced our purchases of it. And so some examples of that would be like ramen noodles, boiled hot dogs, etc. So we would say kind of something like good 1 is an inferior good, or as your income increases, you buy less hoodies. You buy suits, ties, whatever. And so what happens if kind of the opposite things happen and our new optimal bundle is this O prime? Well, we buy less good 2, making good 2 inferior, and more of good 1 because we've moved right on the x-axis. And that would indicate that good 1 is normal and good 2 is inferior. And so this is how we can interpret changes in the optimal bundle. And so the last thing I want to point out is that it can depend on your income whether or not a good is normal. Just like with price elasticity, we saw that closer to the y-axis, that the good was more inelastic, and at the nearer to the x-axis, that the good was hold on, more elastic. I have to check myself on that one. But anyway, the point is that the elasticity changes along a linear demand curve. And so it matters what your initial level of, it can matter what your initial level of income is too, for whether or not goods are inferior or normal as your income increases. And so let's say that we've got our original point O here again, like we've seen, and our income shifts out to Y prime because we're making more money for some reason. And so with this shift out in Y, we've bought more of good 1 and we've bought more of good 2 because O prime is both higher and more to the right of O. And so in the range of Y to Y prime, both goods are normal. Both of their income elasticities are greater than 0. And so, but let's say that this instead happens when we shift our income out from Y prime to Y double prime. So in this case, good 2 is an inferior good between Y prime and Y double prime, because when we go from Y prime to Y double prime, we buy less of good 2, or less of good 1 and more of good 2. So good 1 is actually the inferior good here, and good 2 is a normal good, because as our income increases anywhere, we're buying, the optimal point is moving up vertically on our good 2 axis, and so we're buying more good 2. But for the first increase in income, we buy more of good 1. For the second increase, we buy less good 1. And so that indicates that from here to here, good 1 is, well, from here to here, from Y to Y prime, good 1 is normal, and from y prime to y double prime, good 1 is inferior. And the book uses hamburgers and steak as an example. So like if you're here and you buy a lot more hamburgers as you get to like middle income, and then as you go to high income, you buy less hamburgers and more steak because you can afford it. And so that would make hamburgers normal from here to here, but then inferior from here. So that's the example. Anyway, thanks for sticking around. We've used income changes and price changes here to identify aspects of demand curves and derive demand curves, actually. And so next lecture, we're going to spend even more time talking about how the relative price change and the income effect can be decomposed into different effects. And we can actually say, well, the relative price change caused us to increase, to reduce our consumption, but the wealth effect caused us to increase our consumption. And by exactly how much, we'll know in the next class. And so thanks. Look forward to seeing you next time.